Welcome to Experimarketing, the podcast where we innovate, create, and appreciate. Powered by Mostly Automotive Marketing with Matt Wilson. Here's the host of Experimarketing, Chief Experimarketer, Colin Carasquillo.
What's going on there, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Experimarketers? It's Colin Carasquillo here, back with another episode of Experimarketing, episode 23, where today we are going to be talking about something that I think is really, really interesting. And of course, as always, we're going to try to make this as informative as possible for the dealers, the marketers, all of our listeners and watchers out there. Without further ado, let's bring my co-host on, Matt Wilson.
Hello, Colin. What's up, man? How you doing?
How are you? I'm doing very well. How are you?
Good. I'm good. I'm ready for today's topic.
Yeah, I think today's topic, we're actually going to be talking, well, actually, first of all, the episode, the title is Untapped Audience. Okay. Now, it might not be one of my more creative titles, but I think the conversation we're going to have today with the expert that we have on is going to be one of our more interesting and better conversations. And that's not to knock any of our other phenomenal guests out there, but I think what we're talking about today, the topic in and of itself, is a definite missed opportunity or an opportunity that dealers, marketers can take advantage of, especially as the automotive space becomes hyper, or even more so, more hyper competitive. And of course, with your knowledge on the agency side of things, and then me sitting on the dealer side of things, I think we can have a really great conversation. So with that stated, we're talking with an expert panel member from dealermarketing.com. This gentleman is the founder and principal at SurgeMetrix, and SurgeMetrix provides dealers and marketers bilingual websites, right, to tap into this untapped audience, the Hispanic customer, which we're going to be talking about, and Google optimizations for your Google My Business, so on and so forth. So without further ado, let's bring on this 20-year veteran, Adam Dennis, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, Adam. How are you?
Yeah, 20 years good. I had gray when I didn't have gray when I started, so that's accurate. How you guys doing?
I had more hair when I started, and the unfortunate thing is I just turned 29, so I'm doomed. But no, it's thank you for being on, Adam. And, we did the introduction for you. I think, obviously, the article that you provided to Dealer Marketing as an expert panelist is absolutely phenomenal. The article, of course, is, did you know this? The latest Hispanic car buying preferences. But before we get into that, tell us about yourself, your 20-year history, of course, SurgeMetrix. Go on. Let the listeners know what makes you you.
Okay. My 20 years, I started back when the internet was basically a new thing for dealers, where I had a service that operated up and down the East Coast, selling websites and inventory management tools and a variety of other tools to dealers. And that was as shocking as it sounds in about 2000. And, at that time, you go in and talk to a dealer, and the dealer would be arguing that, no, actually, the circular they had in the paper was the way to go. And obviously, times changed. I remember telling one dealer, laughing with him, and telling him, like, someday, what we're doing is going to kill the newspapers, because there's no point in you putting everything in the newspapers. And, jump to now, and that's pretty much what's happened. But I did that. I sold that business in 2005. I consulted for many years, and then I worked for a large enterprise, running a bunch of their operations. And then the company that bought my company came back to me in 2018 and said, do you want to buy back what you sold us? And so I did that, pennies on the dollar, back in 2019. And when I did it, I took a look around and said, what's changed in the market since I was really active? And I saw that there was just a massive gap when it came to Hispanic marketing. Mm-hmm. And I'm this big guy from New England, so my Spanish isn't very good, but I had a partner that his Spanish is very good. And we took a look around and said, oh my God, there is some real opportunity here for dealers. And we wrote some software to go out to the internet and basically grab dealer websites en masse and do analyses of them to see, okay, who's marketing to the community, who's not, where do they have huge concentrations that they're not taking advantage of. And we did that. We realized, okay, our assumptions were true. There are a lot of dealers out there that could be building new markets and aren't.
Right. So let's talk about this. I mean, obviously tapping into the untapped audience, and in the article, which you guys, everyone out there can access on dealermarketing.com. It was actually just released. So depending on when you listen to this episode, it will be out there. You can go under Adam's work. You can check it out. It also should be on the main homepage of Dealer Marketing, so you'd be able to access that. But tapping into this untapped audience, now, why now? I mean, obviously, it seems like this could have happened sooner, but you talk about growth of the Hispanic population and kind of those demographic factors there. So let's unpack that a little bit. So why now, Adam?
I think the why now is that you have a rapidly maturing population when it comes to Hispanics. If you look at over the history of the United States, you have different minority groups that come to the States. They start out usually with jobs that aren't the jobs that anybody else wants. And then they slowly mature. They build a middle class, and then that middle class becomes a spending powerhouse. And that's what happened to the Hispanic community. So if you look at 30 years ago, 1990, basically spending power was about 210 billion. You go to last year, and they tapped out at about 1.7 trillion. So if those were stocks that you own, that'd be a hell of a return.
Right.
And I think what's happened is a lot of the dealers are playing catch up. They still look at the market as what they understand it to be is not a very mature market. And so they don't really target it. Whereas in reality, I mean, 25% of the market, has about $75,000 or more earning potential. So they're clearly middle class, and that's just shooting up rapidly. And when you consider that half of all births in America are Hispanic, not hard to figure out.
Right. So it is the market that ultimately dealers should start thinking about targeting. If not, hopefully they're already doing some things to target that market. But that's why I wanted to talk about it today. Now, we're going to actually go to Matt on this one. And Matt and I, like I said earlier, I think we could have a really interesting conversation on this. And obviously, Adam, with you as the expert, it's really great to have you here. And you can provide your 2 cents too as well. But Matt, I know you and I, when we were going back and forth about the topic, you said that, for the dealers that you operate with, that it's always been very, very challenging to craft or get buy-in from the dealer or, essentially to create that Hispanic driven campaign. Can you talk about that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I mentioned it with you and I is I was just thinking back to my dealer days as well, when it was like, how do we reach this population? And even now from the agency level, you look at it and it depends on the dealer. And, some dealers are, they agree with what Adam said, right? Like it makes sense that this is a population we need to be marketing to. But then when it comes down to it, is a dealer's like, okay, great. How do I do that? You give them a couple of ideas and they go, yeah, okay. Like how much of the budget do you want to point towards the Hispanic market? And they look at it like, okay, I'm spending this on new, this on used, this on service, this on branding. What I'm going to spend on Hispanic marketing. And it's like, it's gotta all get bunched together. It's gotta be a main part of it. It can't be like, remember how the day used to be like, I'm buying radio, I'm buying TV, I'm buying print. And, oh yeah, here's my digital. It can't be the, oh yeah thing. It's got to be part of the big thing. But I've always, from the dealer level, have found it challenging. Nissan would come to me and say, Matt, 9% of your business is Hispanic, but it's 22% of the population of your market. So let's get the 9% up to 15%. What are we going to do? And I'd be like, that's a great question. That is a great question.
Yeah. So, I mean, hopefully, I think in this, what we'll do is also unpack some of these things, ways for dealers to target that, prepping the team, which I know, Adam, that was very important for you to cover, for us to cover. So we will absolutely do that. But Matt, I agree with you. I think, even for us, we have a couple dealerships that are in very Hispanic markets. And even so, and I'm hoping maybe Adam, can provide me with some really great insight on this one. And, it could start the great conversation here. But the same thing, we've done campaigns where, let's say, for example, we're doing some digital display or we're doing some search campaigns. And we obviously are going after that Hispanic customer. So we have Hispanic messaging and things like that. But, I think one of the arguments that I've heard in the past is that actually Hispanic customers are searching in English when they're looking for something. Now that could be completely wrong, and maybe Adam can tell us that. But Adam, so I see it, you're like chomping at the bit here. Is that true? I don't know. These are just things I heard. Maybe it could all be made up.
As my wife loves to say, yes, yes, and no. Right. So, and mind you, that always confuses me when she says it. But the point is that it depends on where you are in the country, right? If you're down on the borderlands, like you're in Texas, right? You have situations where right along the border, 95% of the population is Hispanic, right? Mm-hmm. And you also have a very aged population where you might have 3 or 4 generations that are Hispanic. And so you can mix up all you want, Spanish and English, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think it's as compelling an argument to say it all has to be in Spanish. You can actually play around, right? Mm-hmm. You go to other places, like we have a dealer in Pennsylvania where they are new to marketing to the community. A lot of the Hispanics, and mind you, starting off, I'm going to point out Hispanic, Latino, Latinx. There are a lot of different terminologies.
Sure.
We settle on Hispanic because my partner settled on it. I let him call it. But the point is, just for conversation, Hispanic all the way through, they have about 1.2 million Puerto Ricans, right? So around their dealership, within 50 miles, they're doing a Spanish language marketing approach. But one of the things is to remember, you don't market to the language, you market to the culture, right? So part of the places where some of the marketing falls apart is it's not as simple as just taking an English text and converting it into Spanish. It's taking that English text and converting it into a message that can be heard. Right. And so emotion, culture, things that resonate with the community are things you want to wrap it around your messaging. You also want to be very sensitive to what's the nuance of the community, in the sense that if you have a high population of Mexican origin, right, you're going to be using the word troca for truck. Because that is a nuance on the language, as opposed to what people think of in more standard Spanish. There are also certain holidays you're going to emphasize. So like Cinco de Mayo is a very important holiday. So you want to have a conversation with the culture. If you have a conversation with the culture, you get further, because it shows that you actually understand the culture. Now, here's the interesting thing is, if you're in an area where there are a bunch of Italians, right, you know how to speak the language, because it's much more common to our culture these days. We got all white guys on this call. I mean, just there's certain things.
50% Puerto Rican.
There you go.
There you
But
go.
I'm saying there's stuff we bring to the table in cultural bias and perception that can flavor how we're talking. If you start thinking about, okay, how do I really understand the community I'm marketing to? What's the nuance in the community? And we wrote software to basically figure out, the different origins of the different groups around the dealership, so that you can flavor the conversation appropriately. Then you make more ground. The other thing that you have to look at is, you got to build a reputation. So sometimes dealers, what they'll do is they'll run an ad for 4 months and just give up. Oh, it didn't work, right? They're not looking at did the ad have any traction? Did it have failure based upon what was written? Did the ad have failure in terms of, we have no reputation, so we have to build that reputation, because it's a community that in some cases, there might be a reputation for that dealership that's negative in the community that you're going to need to offset. So there are all these things you have to play with to be able to basically build a reputation and a positioning over time.
I think ultimately that goes back to Matt's point, which is that it can't just be the afterthought. I mean,
Bingo.
It needs to be the main, a main component of a dealership's marketing strategy. And then, yes, thank you for answering my questions, where basically it's about A/B testing, which, like Experimarketing, that's what we're doing. We're A/B testing. We're trying new ways of marketing to a new audience. So, I mean, I love that. But first, one, you gave 2 tips, which actually I'll reiterate at the end. I'm just going to do a brief overview here, but marketing to the culture, which I think is absolutely incredible, right? So then you're talking about the nuances of the community, the culture itself, emotion, things like that. And then, of course, building a reputation with the market, and maybe even doing some damage control just in case that there already is a negative reputation out there. So we'll definitely touch on that at the end, like a laundry list here. But first, I think it's about understanding the audience, right? So we're going to backtrack a little bit here. And so we know that obviously the audience is untapped by many dealers. We know that it's a rapidly maturing population, as you had mentioned, that their spending power is increasing. What other things do we know about the Hispanic market? And of course, it includes all of the other, nomenclature or names that you could give to these individuals. But essentially, talk about spending power. What else do we know about the buyers? And then we'll get into the surveys. You ran 2 incredible surveys, so we'll talk about those. But who is this Hispanic buyer?
Boy, it varies. I mean, first thing don't look at the community as monolithic. Like, in the last political cycle, you'd listen and people would be talking Hispanic community. Come on, guys. If you're Cuban American, you have different ways of looking at life than you do Mexican American or Dominican or blah, 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 blah. There's variation. Like I married into a West Indian family. And if you're at all part of West Indian culture, you find out that West Indian's the big broad tent, but in reality, there's a whole lot of flavor. So if you've ever been on a cruise ship and traveled through the Caribbean, you'll hit an English-speaking island. Say you go to Jamaica, right? You can't understand a word they say. If they're speaking local Jamaican, most Americans can't fathom what's being said, right? Still English, but it's a dialect.
Mm-hmm.
You go to an island like Antigua, where actually I live in the Caribbean. And when you hear an Antiguan speak, there's again a variation. Same thing occurs with Spanish. So there's variation according to culture. And then you have all those histories and traditions that have evolved over the last 200, 300, 400 years that make everybody different. And so that's why the first rule that I say is don't fall victim to thinking it's all the same people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Recognize that there is variation, recognize that you need to learn the culture in your area. And as you do that, you're going to have more grounds to have a conversation. Does that make sense?
It does. And it's very important. Obviously, I mean, understanding the audience, I think that's even something that dealers struggle with just, a standard audience when they're trying to make campaigns, not let alone a Hispanic audience. But in here, you highlight that they're younger buyers. So if we can just kind of extrapolate on that. So a younger buyer, which I think for a lot of dealers, and I hear it here too from the general manager and the dealer principal. It's, oh, you millennials, you guys, you're millennials, you're soft and, you're sensitive and blah, blah, blah. You want immediate gratification and all these different things. But I mean, listen, that is the audience, and we have buying power. And obviously there are millennial Hispanic individuals. We know that their buying power is increasing on the daily. So let's talk about that. So they're a younger buyer, but how are they compared to, the national average of regular buyers?
Yeah, I don't have statistics on saying how they compare in detail, but what I can say is that when you look at the overall spectrum, yes, it's typically a younger buyer. So you're looking at like an 8 to 10 year variation in terms of if you start developing a relationship with the community now, you're going to know it's a community that by and large is, in terms of just numbers, is younger than the general population. So your relationship over time, when you look at that, dealers always talk about the lifetime of a customer, lifetime value, right? If you really look at developing that relationship, your lifetime value is going to be greater because if you land that customer and you hold that customer, you might pull an extra 10 years out of that customer than what you would get with the general population who comes at a slightly older age. The other thing that you want to look at is, there's some stereotypes in terms of the community, in terms of the role that women play. And culture's evolving, and women typically play, and we found this from our surveys, is a bigger role in the decision-making process, and sometimes the determining role in the decision-making process. So if you're a dealer and in walks a Hispanic family, don't talk to the man only. Especially if they're younger, talk to both. Make sure you win both, because otherwise you might find a situation where that woman goes to her husband and says, nah, we're not going here. So you don't want to be ruled by your own perceptions that might limit your ability to connect, right?
And that's great. And I think one of the things that, we'll talk about that kind of like the transition from what happens in the digital space, if you will, the digital ether, to what occurs at a dealership. And of course, as we mentioned, prepping your team. But I think one of the points that I want to make about this younger audience, right? If there's that 8 to 10 year variation in terms of the age, right? What that means too for dealers and marketers is you need to specifically look at platforms that would obviously be geared towards a younger audience.
Yes, correct.
And essentially dealers, just like you're targeting your millennials and perhaps even some of you out there are really, moving forward with targeting some Gen Z buyers, which is great for you guys. Definitely consider that when you are advertising towards the Hispanic clientele and the Hispanic market, is that they probably have, and unfortunately I don't have the data, but I would assume that they're on the same platforms that, a Caucasian individual would be on. So, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all of these different areas that I don't even think dealers really have a good grasp or understanding of, even with their standard campaigns they're running now. So that's why I wanted to touch on the age portion of it, because I think a lot of people do. They kind of say, oh, millennials, they're young, they don't have buying power.
Big mistake.
Yet.
Big mistake.
It is a big mistake. It is. So I'm glad you came out and said that. But anyway, so you had one of the standout points. You actually ran the survey in 2020, and then you ran another survey in 2021. So this is the Hispanic car buyer survey. So this was actually pre-COVID, right? This was right before COVID had happened, and then the world got turned upside down.
That's one of those.
Exactly. Yeah, now we got to do another survey like right away. But so yes, I want to touch on the standouts, right? So the 5 standouts from the survey, because I think that would help dealers fully understand this. So one you had already touched upon, which is women play a bigger role in the decision-making process than most people think. And I actually would think that is now spans every type of race, nationality, whatever it is. I mean, I always say about my girlfriend, listen, the boss gets what the boss wants, or talk to her, she's the boss, or, and whether that's a way of putting the onus off of me, but, it's true. I think that's kind of just become the thing. Hey, I got to talk to my wife, or, when someone has some level of uncertainty, that's what we all say, regardless of, whether we're in girlfriends, marriage, whatever it is. But anyway, number 2, U.S. Hispanics want to touch, feel, and test drive vehicles. Now, I think you could make the argument that that's how a lot of people still are, right? We see statistics from Google and don't quote me if it's exactly not right, but I just saw a presentation from Google, and I believe, if I recall correctly, that it's 65% of people now would actually consider doing their purchase completely online, or doing a online purchase. And then 75% of people would want to at least start a portion of the purchase online and then complete it at the dealership. Now that gap's closed astronomically over the past year due to COVID, and even prior to that, those numbers have gotten closer together. But still, the 75% of people, that means then that these individuals still want to come in, most likely take a test drive, touch a vehicle, so on and so forth. So with that, they're not too far different than the standard customer would be, or a Caucasian customer, correct? Sort of.
I mean,
explain.
Because when you look at the numbers, at least from our survey, I believe my memory serves me correctly, it was like 90%, over 90% would like to test drive, right? So that runs in the face of some of that other data for the general population. I think when you look at a lot of the digital retail conversation that's been going on, there is a lot of data out there, but it hasn't really been segmented based upon different markets.
Sure.
And so as a consequence, you look at a smaller market like the Hispanic market, I don't think that data has really been sifted out. So you're going to see some sort of warping of perceptions there. But what we saw was that, vast majority wanted to touch and feel. Mm-hmm. So something to be aware of. Now, that doesn't exclude the possibility of doing partial online sales, through the digital marketing process. And some of the solutions that are out there are designed for that. They're not designed for a straight on online sale. They're actually designed for an interactive sale. I would say, because I think in the Hispanic market, it's a much higher number that wants to drive.
That's a very valid point, though, Adam, that you bring up there, because, all of these numbers are getting presented to dealers. And it's true. They probably have not done this deeper dive that shows how different a specific audience may interact with that. And that, just from a marketing perspective, makes me think like, hey, your messaging even might need to be a little different, where instead of saying, hey, build your deal completely online, or like, don't worry about coming to the dealership, it actually almost might behoove a dealer to say, come take your test drive, or, come see us for in-person sales still, or whatever it is. But that's very, very important to get that customer. So we've all
been in marketing for a long time. And that's a continual problem where, in marketing, they take a big number that's a generalized number and then apply it locally. Mm-hmm. And you can't do that. I mean, you guys have been around long enough. You know that you got a segment, you got an opportunity to break up that market, understand your market, and segment it so you vary your messaging depending upon who the audience that you're talking to. So you say language that brings them into your dealership so you can convert.
Right. No, it's super important. So number 3 here, listen, if you're not a Toyota dealer, sorry, but for Toyota dealers out there, Toyota enjoys a dominant role in appealing to the Hispanic market. They've reached out to them for years. So Adam, let's talk about this. So now from an OEM perspective, here's a brand that obviously saw that this was an untapped audience and started tapping it. Can you tell us just a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, I think you said it. It's not complicated in the sense that they started reaching out a number of years ago. They made it part of their program. It's not as Matt said earlier, it's not an afterthought. It's part of the strategy, right? Because, I mean, if you look at the numbers, this is why, I could get into some fun conversation like, okay, when you look at the real stats that are out there, why aren't dealers going after the market more than they are? And I think a lot of it's just this weight of perception that's out there that it's not a community that's worth pursuing.
Right.
Whereas Toyota looked at the numbers and said, oh, hell, we're going after this community. And they built a reputation accordingly. And that's why they consistently score at the top. I mean, Ford inched up between last year and this year in the numbers. They inched into third place, which was great for Ford. And I know that Ford is actually seriously looking at figuring out a strategy to more effectively develop a relationship with the community, which is great. So you might see some changing over time as Ford matures its approach to the market. But it all comes down to, have you built a reputation that's deserving of respect and a desire to buy your product?
Right. Now, next one, 4 here, selling in Spanish does matter. So that kind of goes back to, the question I had asked, which you so eloquently explained, which was, you can try both, right? A/B test, whether on your ad campaigns, both in English and Spanish. But now when it comes to selling in Spanish, and then ultimately we'll probably tie this into preparing your team, it would probably be beneficial for you to have some Spanish speaking salespeople and BDC and things like that, correct?
Correct. I mean, actually, the biggest obstacle we have when we talk to dealers, and getting to what Matt said earlier, where things kind of broke down for him with some of these dealers, is when they don't have bilingual staff. So you'll have a dealer that says, I really know it's a good idea, but I don't have bilingual staff. And what we always say in response is, okay, so are you hiring? Put a bilingual component in your hiring process, right? Say, actually make it as part of the sales rep or BDC, whatever you're buying, whatever you're hiring. Say, put down, preference, or however you word it, Spanish as either a second or first language. It's not complicated. It's not rocket science. And we've actually helped dealers in some instances actually put together ads and go after people. We, again, going back to the dealer I mentioned in Pennsylvania, we actually worked with them to acquire 2 staff members, 2 salespeople for their team. And when they start out, oh my God, I got a lot of respect for the GM at that dealership, because he persevered despite the fact that when we first started, we couldn't get any traction. But as he brought on bilingual staff, as that staff started working in their messaging, right, in the messaging that they were doing through Facebook and other avenues, they've started to see the response kick up. And then, of course, if you have somebody that speaks Spanish or primarily speaks Spanish, then walk into the dealership and you have someone that can receive them in a way that, is understandable and makes sense to them, boom, you've got them into your sales funnel and you're moving forward. If you don't, we'll tell a dealer, if you can't have somebody on staff, don't do it until you get somebody on staff, because otherwise you run the risk of having a fail and actually damaging your reputation, which you don't want.
Sure. Okay. So we'll make that as part of one of the tips for prepping your dealership is, hey, before you're going to actually do this, ensure that you have the people and a process in place to actually handle, the opportunity generation through your marketing. So now the last one. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt there. I even
shame on you.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry. I'm not sure of the law, but I'm pretty sure that in some states, I think we ran into this in Connecticut at one point, is if you're marketing, to a certain audience, that there was some kind of, I don't know if it was an automotive legality thing or what, but you had to have paperwork available in that language.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And I would do that no matter what, because I have a good friend of mine that runs a service on risk mitigation. Better Vantage Point. He's a guy who's been in the industry for 30 years. Yep. Yeah, Tom Klein.
I do.
And might want to have him on sometime, because it's a good conversation. When it comes to risk mitigation for these dealers, it is crazy to sell to somebody who speaks Spanish, especially if you have somebody who speaks only Spanish, to sell to them and then have English language documents, because you've just opened yourself up to a potential lawsuit, right?
Yep.
So I totally agree. I actually, regardless of law, what we always advise dealers is get your transactional documents translated.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's probably not the law. And like you said, it's not the law everywhere, but it's not a bad idea to have it done, because you do open yourself up. Imagine, Colin, you walk into a place and you have to buy a car and everything's all the documents are in Spanish.
Right. No, that's what I'm saying. It's good for dealers to know that.
Yeah. What's funny is this might get you a little off track, but it's when I talk to dealers, this is one of the things I talk about is, imagine you live in a country where everybody speaks Spanish, you speak English, right?
Yeah.
So what are you going to look for to buy from a dealer? If the dealer advertises in English, right, and they might have Spanish mixed in, no problem, but you see in English, that's who you go to.
Right,
you go to them. If you're treated well through the whole process, the documents are in English, everything's there, you're going to come out of there feeling really good. So what happens when you go home? You go
Talk
tell
about
everybody that you speak English with, because
Right.
typically what happens, those communities are rather insular,
Right.
right? So you're going to go tell everybody that's the dealer you need to go to. So there is, when we talk about prepping the dealership, you got to look at it on the referral end. You better have a good policy for referrals, because when that person comes out of the sale, if they've had a good experience and they go home, you want to give them an opportunity to refer people.
Right. No, absolutely.
Sure.
So now we talk about, well, the last item here, Hispanics are online and enforced. I think it's a misconception, and it's one of the things that I know that we've done with some of our dealers in the past where maybe we haven't been as successful with the Hispanic market, but we always say, you know what, we're just going to do some kind of like local guerrilla marketing where we'll target all of the little like cafes and maybe, shops that the Hispanic market's going to. And that all of a sudden is going to open the floodgates. And we do some online advertising to them. But, Adam, essentially what you're saying here is that, hey, the Hispanic, they're online. I mean, they're online. They're all connected. I mean, it shouldn't really, aside from, unique messaging, understanding their shopping behaviors and their tendencies, they're online.
Yeah, and actually their adoption rate tends to be higher than the general population in terms of their usage of social media. The other thing is, one thing don't forget is that, Americans typically don't use WhatsApp, but the community also use WhatsApp very heavily. So if you're going to be marketing the community, one of the things that you might want to have as a tool for communication is WhatsApp. And the reason for that is WhatsApp is an international tool for communicating across borders.
Right.
So in the case of, anybody who's Hispanic who has family back in their homeland, then they're going to be, that's how they talk to everybody. But I would tell you, I wouldn't exclude the act of reaching out to local groups either, because it all comes down to, again, reputation. If you're seen to have, a relationship with local restaurants and other things like that, then that's going to play to that sort of hum in the environment around you, that this is a company that cares about us, right? And, if you look at it within a political context, and, there's a period of time where if you're Hispanic in this country, you've kind of been on the receiving end of not always positive behavior. So if you run into a company that is nothing but positive, that's supporting a local baseball team, for example, that is comprised of mostly Hispanic kids, that's, buying from local restaurants, that's doing these different things that you would just expect in any small town around the country, then that's going to play to that reputation ranking that people are going to have in their heads, that this is a company that's not just talking the game, but actually they're living it.
Right. So it's about building that community aspect, the community involvement, but then still targeting people online, digitally to further strengthen that.
And a lot of dealers already do that. So it's just an extension of what they already do as a strategy.
So now switching gears to 2021, right? So you guys ran your survey again, and what you found out, though, some interesting things, a little different, right? So over the year, things have changed, obviously, whether it was COVID or just, consumer shopping behaviors evolved. But what we're seeing here, so Hispanics are tactile. So that they love to test drive vehicles still. All right. So we saw that, right? So from 2020 to 2021, individuals still love to come test drive vehicles. So for dealers out there, obviously we touched on this already, but it's going to be about making sure that your messaging is in place to say, come test drive our vehicles, or we have inventory for you to test drive, or hassle-free test drive, schedule your test drive. But here, number 2, U.S. Hispanics prefer to be marketed in Spanish. So not only are we saying that selling in Spanish matters, but now, which we already started discussing, marketing in Spanish does matter. So once again, like you said, there's always a little caveat. It's about where your dealership's located, so on and so forth. But that shows you that is very important to ensure that, one, you have a process in place to make sure that your text and verbiage and everything you utilize on your ads are proper, right? Because there's different slang, different terms, as you had mentioned, different ways of writing things out. So that's really, really fascinating for us to say. Number 3, brand reputation means a lot. So whether it's your dealer brand or the manufacturer's brand, and that goes back to what you had just talked about, Adam, which is building that community involvement, showing that you care for the community, that you do have materials and a process in place at your dealership that show that you care for that unique customer, that you can facilitate a deal should that customer choose your dealership to do business with. And here's a good one. Now something different. So we'll extrapolate on this one. Cell phones are the primary shopping tools for US Hispanic, excuse me. So you talk about it, right? Obviously, you guys at SurgeMetrix, you specialize in providing bilingual websites, mobile optimized websites, mobile first websites. So let's just talk about that, though, because I feel like a lot of dealers, and Matt, I know will weigh in on this one. A lot of agencies, when they sell dealers, they're talking about the desktop version of the site first, when in reality, shouldn't you talk about mobile, because it's very important, right?
Oh yeah, well I did a whole episode of Mostly Automotive Marketing about why do website companies pitch you and they all talk about the desktop site, and at the end they throw in the mobile thing. But according to the stat you just mentioned there, that's even more so important with the Hispanic customer.
Yeah, let me give you some stats that are really entertaining. So I just put up an article a few minutes ago about we wrote some software to go out the internet, crawl dealer websites to collect different types of data. One thing we did 2 years ago, and then we did one just a few months ago, is went out, crawled dealer websites, and submitted those dealer websites to, and it was over 10,000 that we did, to Google's algorithm for evaluating site performance, right? Mm-hmm. And you guys want to guess the average score out of 100 that all dealer websites scored? Anybody?
20.
Close.
22.
What's that, Matt?
30.
Matt, you're an optimist. 13.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And honestly, I might get slaughtered here if there's anybody from the OEMs listening. In a lot of cases, the OEMs, that's at fault, because what they do is they often require a whole bunch of third-party tools on the websites. The dealers also buy third-party tools, and a lot of the third-party tools don't respond that quickly. So what it does is it slows down the load time. Now, you might have segments of the page that load to give some sort of experience.
Right.
But the thing to remember is a lot of people on phones, if you have a phone plan that's really good, then it might not matter, right? But if you have a phone plan that's not top of the line, then you might have a slow performance. And you guys know, I mean, I don't have to sell you on this, is that the longer someone waits, the more likelihood they're going to drop, right? And so one of the things that we always talk to dealers about is, hey, let's take a look at your website and see what's blocking your performance. Mm-hmm. And, the dealer a lot of times will say, hey, but I just did it on my phone here and it's good. And I'll say, yeah, it might be good for you, but you want to go after every way possible to increase that performance out of 100, because we tested it on a bunch of our sites and we said, okay, let's follow what Google says we need to do.
Right.
So we went through a whole bunch of websites and improve performance, making all these changes according to Google. And what we found that was on average per month, we generated 34 more organic leads.
Just by improving the website performance.
Just by improving the performance of the website. Incredible. So that's interesting data segment number one. The other data segment that's really interesting is, you find often the case, you'll find it across the internet that 90% of Hispanics use cell phones as a way to hunt. We often have stats come back where I use it a lot of times when I do a presentation to a dealer, where we have this result that came back. There were 76 leads generated. Every single lead came from a cell phone. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't 92% or 93%. It was 100% came from a cell phone. Now, will that persist in every case? No. But does that give you an indication of how significant it is to actually have your website perform well in mobile? Definitely.
Right. So, I mean, listen, you guys, everyone listening out there, Matt, do you want to say anything? You're chomping at the bit there too.
Nope.
Okay. All right. So with that, I mean, Adam, it's you guys obviously can call Adam at SurgeMetrix and the team over there, do an audit on your website. But let me just say this too, for the dealers out there, just some, free advice for what it's worth. Have your web providers, because they'll do it as well. If you ask them, you just need to ask, have them do an audit on your site, and they will tell you any sort of inactive pixels or, what's loading in terms of slow widgets and third parties and things like that. And then it's the dealer's job from there, working with your ad agency, whoever, whatever that relationship looks like, to then say, all right, to the vendor partners that have, slow widget load times and things like that, hammer these people to make those load times faster. Because I understand, I mean, especially now in the era of digital retailing, which we will just call retailing at this point in time, a lot of those third-party widgets, whether they live on the site or whether they're a third-party experience that, pops open in your website or takes you to a different site, that also plays a role in site load time. So it's just very, very important to be cognizant of these things. And yeah, your web providers will do it for you for free. Ask them to run an audit. Ask them to run a monthly audit. Ask them to run a weekly audit. They probably won't do a daily audit for you, but ask them to run audits. That will help you out, dealers. So with that, we then come back to 2021, same thing as 2020. Hispanics are still online and in force. You have here, they actually over-index on social media use, are fully engaged on all these platforms, which that gives the dealer the straightforward direction, basically. Hey, dealers, yep. you know the big players out there. You need to be on there. You need to be on there with Hispanic marketing because it does matter that you are marketing to individuals in Spanish, so on and so forth. So with that stated, Adam, let's talk about, one, the tips to help dealers stand out, and then, of course, prepping your dealership. So I'm just going to start with the tips that I wrote down, and then you say, you know what, Colin, you're either spot on or, hey, you missed this. So one, I thought this was very important, market to the culture, right? Yep. So dealers, understand your audience, understand the culture, the emotion behind, the culture, how to market the correct message out there, nuances in your specific community, of course, different dialects. It's all very important to have there. Build a reputation with the market, right? Yep. You have to build a reputation, not only that your dealership is at one with the community, but it's just a positive relationship amongst that whole demographic. It's not monolithic. So this kind of ties back to the fact that you had said, that specific culture. Well, there are very different aspects of people within that Hispanic umbrella, if you will. And then obviously look to build lifetime value because you do have a younger audience, about that 8 to 10 year age variation, which you had mentioned. Did I miss anything?
I would say it's okay to start small, right? Okay. So, cool. So for example, what we've learned is when we originally started, we were like gangbusters. Come on, guys, come in, we'll do this advertising, we'll spend all this money, blah, blah, blah. And you just say cheaping crickets, right? And then we started realizing, well, we put together this little package, like $1,000 just to get started, right? And the point there is sometimes you have to do proof of concept with these guys. And you have to show them that there is a market out there. And then you can expand and build from that point forward. So you don't always have to start big. You start small and get to your Experimarketing. You experiment. You figure out what gives you traction, what has resonance, what doesn't have resonance. Right. And then the other tick that I throw in there, and Matt mentioned this earlier, and it's spot on, is don't look at this as an ad hoc thing. It is going to be part of your strategy moving forward. And it's going to take some learning to figure out what works for you. Because the interesting thing about it is we could have the same exact ad campaign in one area and use that ad campaign in another area. And one is doing really well and the other one's falling apart. Right. And there are all these, in some cases, unpredictable and unknown variables that are out there. Because, for example, if that dealer had something that had gone very wrong with the community and had a bad reputation that we're not going to know about, and they might not even know about, right? Then that's blocking you. And you have to, it's hard to build trust if trust has been lost, but you have to have that commitment. So if you start small, you're not spending a ton of money finding out what's working and what's not working. You're spending a little bit of money to learn the market and then advance.
Too, I feel like in that situation, it's good to have somebody like I always had a person I would go to at the dealership. Like, okay, there was a guy in the service department, one of the service managers was part of the Dominican community in Danbury. Well, he would be the guy that I would go to and say, okay, listen, is this message that we're trying to deliver to this community, not only is it, like you said, like language, even if it's in English, but is it saying the right things? Right. Yeah. Is it, because it's hard to market to a demographic that you're way outside of, right? Correct. Yes, like it's hard to market to so that you have no concept of what is, what the person wants to hear. And so I think that you got to almost find that person and be like, okay, you're my conduit to this market. Does this make sense what I'm about to do?
Yeah, that's really good advice. And the thing is, too, to remember is you don't have to, when you're hiring to break into the Hispanic market, I would say hire to the individual, don't hire to the training. So In other words, you could pick up someone who's young or someone who doesn't have much experience but has an incredible personality and a bunch of relationships. You want that person over somebody who's coming in with a bunch of car experience, right?
Yes.
Car experience can be taught, but relationship building and the right attitude, that's something that often people just have. So that's part of the thing that can get in the way of sometimes hiring, because these dealers think, oh, I've got to hire somebody with experience. No, you don't. No, you don't, because that person you can pick up, you can put them as a junior to somebody else who can train them over time. And they will be that conduit, like getting to what Matt says, they're a conduit to give you an understanding, but also don't fall victim to just having that one person. Build, if you're a sizable dealership, build more than one, because then you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. Right. And you're relying upon someone who might have the wrong perception going on as well. So going back to, again, this dealer in Pennsylvania, they picked up two people, one guy who's very seasoned, who had, a lot of history in the dealer community, and then a woman who didn't. And then they're working together now moving forward, and it gives them a good feel for things, and they're building. Another tip is, put the personalities out there, right? Record videos where they give walkthroughs on vehicles, where it's a quick 30-second video presenting a car that just came on the lot, or do ads that are built around them talking about, hey, come to meet me, come to the dealership. Yes, you're building a personality, but you're also building your dealership at the same time.
Right, which helps that reputation. I mean, that you had mentioned, now here's a trusted outlet. Here's a trusted dealership where they do care about our community. They're giving us information, right? So, okay, prepping, we talked about hire to the individual, right? Instead of just the experience, which I absolutely love that. Because like you said, it's a personality, relationships with the community that can't be taught. I mean, that's something that someone does on their own. So hire to the individual. Then obviously highlighting those personalities, put those personalities out there. What else can you talk about in terms of prepping the team, right? So go ahead.
Make sure your leadership knows what you're doing, right? And the commitment that you have. So, if you're an owner that says, okay, I want to go on this new direction, you want to make sure you explain to your leadership and your team what you're doing. And then secondly, when you hire people in who are, bilingual, they're just a member of the team with a certain expertise. They're not different, right? So you don't want a situation where you have your English-speaking team and your bilingual team. Big disaster, because what that does, that reinforces sort of a cultural perspective that's not going to play to your advantage, right? It's going to, that perception will be seen by people. No. So what you want to do is if you prep your team in terms of understanding this is a strategy that we're moving forward, and we're going to be building slowly, and here's the people that are part of this effort over time, great. The other piece is besides prepping your leadership and then your actual team itself, is doing the things that we were talking earlier in terms of translating your transactional documents. And then based upon the configuration that you have on staff in terms of bilingual talent, you want to look at how do I need to handle my road to the sale, right? If for example, you have F&I and there's nobody there that speaks Spanish, then clearly that person or people that you have who are bilingual are going to need to walk that individual through the process. They're not going to be able to just dump off in finance and walk away. They're going to have to be there through the whole transaction, right? And so when you move, you got to look at, okay, how are we configured? So then moving through the process. And then finally, when you start looking, okay, coming out the other side on that sale, you got to ask yourself, okay, do I have any formal referral processes in place, right? And then what do they look like? And how can I test to see what type of referral programs I could put together to optimize my relationship with the community? We have a dealer in Chicago, for example, that his spend that he has on advertising is lower than what most dealerships would have when they make a full commitment. And the reason is because he has a very forward-thinking referral program. So literally he'll pay a referrer that leads to a sale $300, which isn't that common, right? And in some states, it's illegal to do that. So you kind of have to look at what does your state allow, of course. But he's done that. He's like, look, Adam, because when I was talking to him early on and just trying to learn and say, okay, how best to approach things, he's like, Adam, it works because when I treat people from the community well, they go back home and they say, I'm a good dealer to do business with. So I want to really push that. And I want to really build that relationship. And so each one reaches 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5, and he's able to build. So you got to look at the referral process. The other tip that I would say in terms of prepping your team is take a look at your review process. Now, there are a couple of things with reviews that's important to look at, and a lot of dealers miss this, is your reviews are insight to how your business is performing.
Right.
So if you're just looking at, oh my God, I got a 1 out of 5, big mistake. If you're looking at it, I got a 1 out of 5, and what does that tell me about what's breaking down in my business? Fantastic. That's the right way to look at it. This other thing to do is to say, all right, how do I promote Spanish language reviews? So you really want to make sure you have a focused, as again, looking at your road to the sale and the whole sales process. When you come out the other end, you want a well thought out process to generate Spanish language reviews. Why? Because it's pretty obvious. Within the community, if you have Spanish language reviews and someone's looking and saying, is this a place where I want to buy from? Is this a place where I'm going to be welcome and treated well? Well, if you have people who speak your own language saying, yes, this is a great dealership, not hard to figure out, right? Again, going back to the example I said, if you were an English person living in a Spanish-speaking country, if you looked at the reviews and you saw English reviewers that were saying, these guys are great, they treat you really well, what are you going to do?
You're going to go. You're going to go, and you're going to talk about it.
Exactly.
I think that's a really incredible point, because I know for dealers, I feel like it's the battle for Google My Business now, right? And a lot of dealers are always talking about optimizing their Google My Business profiles and getting good reviews. And there are some great vendor partners and tools out there that, dealers can access and utilize to garner reviews that then get disseminated out to Google and Facebook and so on and so forth. But guess what? Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard of those vendor partners saying, hey, we can do Spanish reviews too. And once again, just showing how untapped that is. And I'm sure, and you guys probably have the research, but even just utilizing those Spanish reviews, as you had mentioned, not only does that build that, kind of rapport with that audience and kind of show that, hey, they can feel comfortable and safe doing business or transacting with that dealership. But ultimately, Google probably looks favorably upon that if someone's searching in, Spanish or looking for specific things. And now your dealership is actually populating because you are catering to that audience. I mean, sky's the limit.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons we got into Google My Business optimization, because we saw the benefit of when we worked with dealers on optimizing Google for Spanish and English, we would just see the organic traffic just tick right up.
Shoot up.
And it's such a small investment. That's the funny thing about it. It's such a tiny investment to do that right. But then, it prints money in the end. And so that's one of the little tips I would definitely say is really important.
Really, really cool. I think Matt and I both like printing money, right, Matt?
I sure do, yeah. I just need some more ink for my printer and I'm good to go.
There you go. So, Adam, really, really informative. Thank you so much. Now, are you okay if I know Matt can actually do real-time typing. Can we send your email out there, or do you have a general email that people can send something to if they want to talk to you, or what?
Yeah, I think learn more at SurgeMetrix.com, and metrics is METRIX.
Yep.
Rather than CS, it's just what we did, guys, when we got the URL.
It's all good. Yeah. So there you go, guys. At the bottom of the screen there, it's learn more at SurgeMetrix.com. And then I think
instead of making me all anxious and doing it live, just give it to me before the show.
No, I didn't know that. So I think it's learn more at Matt. Learn more at SurgeMetrix.com.
Just Matt, it's the whole thing. There's no space between learn and more.
Oh, it's like,
and then it has the
it's your email address, silly guy.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
Oh, see if you're giving this to me in advance.
Folks, for those that didn't see it because you're listening, it's learn more, all one word, LEARNMORE at SurgeMetrix.com. It's SURGE. Metrix is METRIX as in X-ray.com. You can shoot them an email about getting your Google My Business optimized for both English and Spanish. Perhaps a new website is in your future, a bilingual website.
And we actually do digital audits.
And audits. Very important.
So you mentioned an audit earlier.
Yes.
We do an audit of website performance, and we have some software we wrote to do that. And we look at the concentration of Hispanic by zip code and median income and a variety of other things that we can do for dealers. And we just if that's the most of the relationship we get out of a dealer, no problem. Hopefully help them forward. In other cases, if we actually do business, then we're building the business on facts,
right?
Which is good.
We love facts here at Experimarketing. Facts and data. The data. We love it all. So thank you, Adam. This is Adam Dennis, founder and principal at SurgeMetrix. Thank you so much, man. You're a wealth of information. We really appreciate it. Great conversation. Thanks, and yes, I'm sure we will have you on in the future. So Matt.
Yes, sir.
What do you think, man? Did you get your questions answered, or are the wheels turning up there?
The wheels are turning, but I have a question now.
Okay.
Is what did you pick out from today that you can implement or start talking about at one of your 10 stores tomorrow?
I think ultimately for us, tomorrow. No, I mean, we do, like I said, we have stores, multiple stores that are in Hispanic markets. I think the biggest thing that I'm going to do actually is put together a plan about changing our process and ensuring that we can handle, if a Hispanic customer, which they're already coming in, but actually the right process, the right verbiage for messaging, things like that. We've only done it. This is, like I said, we've only done Hispanic advertising at one of our stores. And like I said, we have 3 stores that are in the Hispanic market. We should be doing it at all 3 stores.
Right.
And so that's on me to say, hey, let's do it. But I think it's about putting the process in place, making sure we have people that can handle that. And then, of course, looking at the advertising to generate those opportunities.
All right, good. That's a good answer.
Is that a good answer?
Get working on it.
Oh, man, I've talked too much for today. So I'm
going
to give myself a break. Thank you guys for all those listening. Please like and follow us on Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channels, Mostly Automotive Marketing with Matt Wilson, my lovely co-host, and of course, Experimarketing. Connect with us on LinkedIn, and we'll see you next time.